Hi folks, welcome to 11.3 Forest Management. So most of the logging in the United States actually takes place on private land, so it's an economic thing. When it's on private land, it can still be regulated. So the timber companies can come in and they can harvest trees, but then they also have to replant. And what you may not know is the timber companies are also allowed to harvest trees in national forests under the supervision of our U.S. Forest Service. And so this is very controversial. Some people think that there should be no logging in the national forests, but there is good reason for this to occur. So our national forest system was established in 1905, and originally it was set aside to grow trees for timber. So obviously there was always that intent to log the forests and to protect our watersheds, which are very delicate areas. So today we still use it for timber, but also for recreation. So that's a big part of that is recreation. Of course, preserving some wildlife habitat. And then the really sad part is mining that occurs in there. And we'll talk about mining more later on. But mining can be very devastating to our national forests, and it's also very controversial. So we have a National Forest Management Act that was enacted in 1976, and this was a thing where we come up with a management plan for each forest, and we talked last lecture about what management plans look like. In order to do this, they must collect data and figure out the maximum sustainable yield for the resources within that forest that are going to be harvested. And then because of this, logging has declined in the national forest since this act, because prior to that it was not regulated. So of course the amount of deforestation that's allowed to occur, I shouldn't say deforestation, the amount of logging that occurs in our national forests depends very much on political policy. So as the different political parties take control in our government, they dictate what is and is not allowed in our national forests. Now on private land, where most of the logging takes place, private landowners, they plant tree plantations. So they're growing trees for money. This happens both in the United States and outside. So think of, like most people are familiar with, a Christmas tree farm where there's all the Christmas trees, all the same kind of tree grown in rows. So these ones are like that, but they're not grown for Christmas trees, they're growing for timber. The problem with these is you're back to even-aged, and in this case also a monoculture, which means they're all the same kind of tree that are grown. So there's not very much variety in the habitat, and so this is not good for wildlife at all. And actually not that great for the trees either, because if a disease comes in, trees do get diseases. If a disease comes in, it spreads readily from tree to tree. Whereas if you had diversity in there of different kinds of trees and even trees at different ages, the disease wouldn't be able to spread like that. So within our national forests too, we have to talk about our fire policies, because now our national forests every year catch on fire. All right, and so a couple of years ago, this was in the news because some things were said about how they manage the forests. And the reality is our forests are managed pretty well, but you got to remember that these are literally thousands of acres of forest over there. It looks small on our map, but they're large areas. So what they do is they're concerned about the dead wood in the forest, that it fuels the fires that start naturally or human-made. And so all these leaf litters and dead trees and limbs and stuff that accumulate in a forest floor, which is natural, and part of the carbon cycle is having that stuff break down, and it puts nutrients back into the soil. But it also makes it much more flammable, much more likely to have a wildfire. So what we're looking at is, what can we do about that? Like, is there a feasible thing that we can do to deal with this? Because no, you can't go into a national forest and clear all that material. It's too large of an area. So one of the things they want to look at is suppressing small fires. It increases actually the likelihood of larger ones, more dangerous fires. So what they want to do is, and they have done, is these things called prescribed burns. This is a controlled burn where our firefighters go out and they select an area that has a lot of fuel down on the ground, so those limbs and sticks and leaf litter, and they dig an area around that area and cut down the trees, and then they basically set it on fire purposefully. And what that will do is take all the carbon from that the fallen wood and put it back in the soil like it needs to go without removing it from the forest, but also clean up that area a little bit, and the forest will grow back. And because of all the nutrients going down in the soil, it actually grows back faster than if it was just removed from the ecosystem. So it builds up that, it removes that fuel buildup in there, and means that when a larger fire that's not controlled starts, that it may not spread as rapidly or as far. So we also have the Healthy Forest Restoration Act in 2003. This one did encourage prescribed burns in forests, and you can see the picture here. This is a forest that had a prescribed burn, and the trees all died, but you can see all this new growth already popping up underneath there from that soil that is rich with carbon. Another thing that it encourages is this idea of salvage logging. So salvage logging is when you go into these forests and pull out the dead trees. Scientists do not like salvage logging, though it does remove some of that dead wood. So again, better than nothing for reducing wildfires. But when you remove the logs from that ecosystem, you're removing carbon and nutrients with them. And so it can actually slow forest regrowth and cause bigger problems with wildfires, and it can destroys things that are called snags, which happen near the water, but they are habitat for wildlife, for like turtles to sit on and stuff. So you're removing a part of that ecosystem that could otherwise put to use. So what we're looking at is how can we be sustainable with our forestry products. And so we have groups that have certified forestry techniques to say, yes, this is a very ecologically friendly type of forestry, and they will certify wood products for there. So if this is something you're concerned with, that how we're treating our forests, and you want to make sure that you as a consumer know that your product is coming from a sustainable forestry practice, that they do actually do these programs where they mark the wood, and I'll show you in a minute. But in Canada, 70% of their timber harvest is certified as sustainable. So in Canada, they're doing a really good job of not clear cutting forests and doing things like salvage or shelter tree or selective forestry. So what you'll see with these is when they harvest these logs, they put a little spray paint on them using this little thing. So you'll see this little sign that means, hey, this means that this forestry technique that this group is doing is certified as sustainable. And you can look for that kind of product if that's what you want. All right, that's all, guys. Bye.